Welcome to the system. I'm an architect. Where people see a problem, I see a system. Something breaks, the screen freezes, the connection drops, an account gets locked, a service stops responding, people start talking all at once. Everyone wants to do something, but no one knows what needs to be protected first. That's how the breaking point begins. The problem isn't just the failure. The problem is that when order is lost, panic takes over decision-making. In log 0.3, we saw which invisible pillars a system relies on. We examined how a single person, account, device, or service can bring the entire structure to a halt, but knowing the dependencies doesn't completely prevent a breakdown. Sometimes even well-prepared systems fail. An attack occurs, a device fails, a person makes a mistake, a provider goes offline. At that moment, the value of the architecture is measured not by whether it prevented the failure, but by whether it maintained its course during the failure. People seek speed in a crisis. They want something done immediately, but acting quickly is not the same as acting correctly. The wrong file might be deleted, evidence might be lost. While trying to solve the problem, the impact might be exacerbated. An architect doesn't rush to fix the system first. First, they assess the extent of the breakdown. What happened? When did it start? Which areas are affected? Which areas are still intact? Is the problem escalating? Are people, data, or money at risk? Any intervention made without answering these questions is like taking a step in the dark. During a crisis, the first priority is not to get everything back up and running. It is to prevent further damage. In a fire, the source is identified first, doors are closed, people are evacuated to a safe area, then the damage is assessed. The process is no different for digital systems. The affected account can be shut down. A suspicious connection can be severed. Faulty automation can be halted. A corrupted data stream can be isolated. Architects call this stopping uncontrolled movement, because when some systems fail, they don't just go quiet. They continue to generate incorrect transactions. A payment may be made twice, access may be granted to the wrong person, a corrupted file may spread to other copies. Continuing to operate is not always the best course of action. Sometimes stopping safely is the right move. People mistake stopping for failure. The architect sees stopping as a boundary. The system acknowledges what it does not know. It does not expand its influence. It creates space for itself to think. But a crisis is not merely a technical event. People's minds break too. Uncertainty grows. Rumors spread. Everyone tells a different version of the truth. One person says the system has completely collapsed. Another says it's just a minor issue. If information is scattered, so is the response. That's why the architect establishes a single language for the event. What do we know? What don't we know? What is being protected right now? Who is on duty? When is the next update? These questions prevent panic from spreading like information. Silence is also dangerous during a crisis. If information isn't provided, fear fills the void. If uncertain information is shared as if it were certain, trust is further eroded. The architect states what has been verified. They distinguish the unknown. They provide a timeline. They identify who is responsible. Because trust is not built by simply saying that everything is under control. It is built by demonstrating how control is regained. When a system fails, not everyone should try to fix the same thing. Priorities are essential. First, human safety, then irreplaceable data, then critical services, then speed. A screen can remain off for hours, but if an incorrect operation causes harm to people, time becomes secondary. A service may slow down, but if data is silently disappearing, visible speed is meaningless. An architect does not determine priorities based on the loudest demand. They determine it based on whether the loss is reversible, money can be recovered, some data can be reproduced, but trust, privacy, and human safety do not return with the same ease. That is why the moment of failure is the test. It reveals what the system considers valuable. The values defined in normal times become reality in the decisions made during a crisis. Speed, transparency, security, or continuity. The architect does not pit these against one another, but he determines in advance which one will take precedence at any given moment. Because if values aren't defined during a crisis, fear rewrites them. A system's first few minutes can determine the story that will be told in the future, how much damage was caused, whether people trusted it or not, whether the mistake led to learning or blame. For the architect, the breakdown is not the end. It is the moment when reality is revealed without a mask. At that moment, the system exposes its weakness, and to those who can see clearly, it also shows how it must be rebuilt. The first action during a breakdown is to stop the damage. The second step is not to lose sight of the truth, because as the crisis grows, people begin to change not only the system, but the event itself. A file is deleted, a record is updated, a service is restarted, then no one remembers what the initial failure looked like. An architect does not destroy the evidence while searching for a solution. What changed? When was the first deviation observed? Which user performed which action? Which system failed to respond? These traces are kept not to find a culprit, but to preserve the path to the truth, because a fix made without knowing the cause will repeat the same failure. In a crisis, everyone wants to help, but uncontrolled help creates new risks. Multiple people change the same setting. While one person restores the system, another enters new data. One team implements a temporary fix. Another team reopens the old path. There is good intent, but there is no common direction. That is why the architect limits the scope of intervention. An incident owner is designated. Technical and communication responsibilities are separated. Decision-making authority is made transparent. Who can shut down the system? Who can restart it? Who can provide information? Who should only observe? This distinction is established to prevent conflicting actions, because too many hands reaching for the same door can lock it shut. Not every crisis carries the same weight. The architect classifies incidents not only based on technical errors, but also on their impact. Is human safety at risk? Could privacy have been compromised? Is data loss ongoing? Is there a financial irregularity? How many people are affected? Is the problem spreading? These questions determine the speed of intervention. Shutting down the entire system for a minor outage may be unnecessary. However, a few minutes of complacency during an undetected data leak could lead to greater losses. The architect does not fuel panic, nor does he minimize the risk. In a crisis, the unknowns are the most dangerous. The human mind fills in the gaps with assumptions. One person says it's an attack, another says it's user error. The architect does not treat assumptions as facts. He categorizes information into 3 areas: verified, strongly indicated, still unknown. This distinction ensures that decisions are based on evidence, not fear, but waiting for evidence does not mean inaction. In some cases, protective measures are needed even when information is incomplete. Suspicious access is blocked. High-risk operations are halted. Affected users are protected. While waiting for certainty, the architect does not allow the damage to escalate. He does not confuse temporary decisions with permanent rulings. A temporary decision buys time. A permanent decision is made once the cause is understood. When a system breaks down, the biggest mistake is trying to restore everything at once, because not all parts are equally important. Some services ensure people's safety. Others ensure data integrity. The architect determines the order of restoration. First, the secure foundation. Then, critical operations. Then, supporting services. Finally, the convenience-providing layers. It is not enough for a system to merely appear to be operational. It must be proven that it is operating with the correct data. Permissions must be verified. The old error must not be reproduced. Otherwise, restarting the system merely puts the failure back into circulation. People assume the crisis is over when the service comes back online. Sometimes they are mistaken. The screen may be up and running, but incorrect records may still be lurking inside. Temporary accesses may not have been revoked. Manual operations may not have been reverted to the main system. The architect does not consider the technical recovery complete. He wants the truth, trust, and accountability to return as well. That is why records of temporary workarounds are kept. Who performed which manual operation, which data will be merged, which authorization will be revoked, and when. Every door opened during a crisis must have a condition for closing, otherwise the temporary solution turns into a new security vulnerability. Communication is also part of the intervention. The customer does not need to know every technical detail, but they must know the facts that affect them. What happened? What is being done right now? Is there anything they need to do? When will the next update come? An architect does not restore trust with flowery phrases. Trust is restored with verified and timely information. People get angry not only at mistakes, but also at being left in the dark. In a crisis, language must be concise. Only what is certain is stated. The unknown is not concealed. Promised deadlines are met. Silence allows people to create their own narratives, and fear often takes precedence over the truth. For an architect, crisis management is not about simply resuming operations. It is about limiting the damage, protecting the truth, to guide people, to restore critical functions in a safe sequence, and to bring the temporary order to a close before it becomes a permanent shadow. Because speed is valuable at the moment of breakdown, but speed without direction is just another form of damage. The end of the moment of breakdown is not the moment the screens come back on. When the system starts working again, the real test begins. The architect checks whether the restored structure is truly the same one. Is data missing? Have permissions changed? Are temporary workarounds still active? Have manual operations been reverted to the main record? Because during a crisis, the system fragments. One part operates automatically, another part is executed manually, another part comes to a complete halt. Then all the parts must come together again into a single reality. Otherwise, service will be restored. The architect does not view recovery merely as a restart. He views it as a reconciliation. The activities generated during the outage are sorted, completed, pending, potentially repeated, potentially lost, because order is not simply everything working, it is every part resting on the same reality. After a crisis, people want to relax. They want the problem to be resolved. They want to return to the old order. But the architect knows this is the most dangerous statement, returning to the old order, because the old order carried the structure that made the breakdown possible. Returning to the same point is to leave the same result for the future. That is why one more question is asked before the crisis is resolved. Why was this incident able to escalate? What was the technical error? What was the deeper architectural flaw? Perhaps access was concentrated in a single person. Perhaps the warning came too late. Perhaps everyone was dependent on the same source. Perhaps people saw the problem but had no safe way to speak up. The architect fixes the visible cause, but they redesign to address the underlying cause. A system merely recovers if it only fixes the failure. It becomes stronger if it changes the cause. A post-crisis review is not conducted to assign blame, because under fear, people withhold information. Mistakes are concealed. Small warning signs go unreported. The architect distinguishes between accountability and blame. Who did what? What information did they have? Why was that decision made? How did the system push that person toward that choice? These questions protect both the individual and the truth, because a structure that blames only the individual will repeat the same mistake with someone else. A structure that blames only the system, on the other hand, renders individual accountability invisible. The architect keeps both in the same record. Human decision, the system's limit. Not every shortcoming is corrected at once after an incident. The architect first identifies the point that would cause the greatest harm if repeated, then the earliest warning sign, then the most effective protective measure. Learning from a crisis isn't about changing everything out of fear, it's about addressing the right issue. Access, alert, backup, and information channels can be re-established. A small but correct change is more valuable than a large but directionless restructuring. The crisis plan must also be updated after the incident. Which step worked? Which one was delayed? Who couldn't access which information? Which decision-making authority was unclear? Which temporary workaround worked? Which one created new risks? If these answers aren't documented, the organization will remember only the pain, not the lessons. The architect transforms the experience into memory. The next breakdown may not come in the same form, but the system learns how to think. Protect first, then contain. Record the truth, communicate clearly, restore critical components in a safe sequence, close the workarounds, reassemble fragmented records, and change the architecture that made the breakdown possible. This sequence provides direction in a moment of panic, because in a crisis, what people need most is not more information, but the right sequence. You don't have to wait for a major disaster today. Imagine a small failure in your system. An account goes down, a device goes missing, a service stops responding. Then write down these questions. Who will we protect first? Which operation will we stop first? Who will document the facts? Who will make the decisions? Who will provide information? Which service will be restored first? How will the temporary arrangement be shut down? What will we change as a result of this incident? These questions don't create a crisis. They preserve your ability to think clearly when a crisis strikes. In log 023, we identified the system's invisible foundations. In log 024, we established how to maintain order when one of these foundations breaks. Now the system can prioritize during a breakdown. It can limit the damage. It can preserve the truth. It can safely return to normal. And it can emerge from the event with a stronger architecture. In this recording, I didn't just show you the moment of failure. I also presented an intervention architecture where panic gives way to order, fear gives way to transparency, and failure gives way to learning. You can see more closely on SHORT.LOG how the architect breaks down crises, mitigates risks, and restores systems. I am the architect. We'll meet again in the next recording. When that day comes, you'll understand why these recordings exist. System status, active, protocol, 004, complete, next protocol, 5, status, active.